Now let's turn to Daniel chapter 2. In chapter 1, we have just seen God's sovereignty in the matter of physical health. God can sovereignly overrule in the matter of our physical health. We must have faith in that. In Daniel chapter 2, we find God's sovereignty over the governments and rulers of the world. That's the theme of Daniel chapter 2. And in chapter 2, verse 1, we read, in the second year of the king reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and he could not sleep. When a man cannot sleep, God can be behind that. 100 years later, we read in the book of Esther, chapter 6, verse 1, that there was a king called Ahasuerus who could not sleep one night. And if you read the story of Esther in that book, you find the whole book revolves around one event, that the king could not sleep. And because the king could not sleep one night, the whole story changed, and the Jews were not slain. Because he couldn't sleep that night, he read the history books and discovered that Mordecai had helped him and so on, and the whole story changes on one small event, a sovereign God who took away sleep from a king. This is the amazing thing we see in the book of Daniel, the sovereignty of God. And this is what we need to know in the last days. Great rulers, prime ministers, presidents, kings, whatever they are, generals, God is sovereign, and He can fulfill His purposes even through a small thing like taking away their sleep. And he had dreams. And I want to show you a passage in the book of Job chapter 33, which tells us that dreams are one way by which God speaks to us. Job chapter 33, it's not the only way. God speaks to us through His Word, but He also speaks through dreams. Job 33, verse 14. It says here, God speaks once, no, He speaks twice, yet no one notices it. In other words, this man, Elihu, who is speaking to Job, is saying God speaks in two ways that I want to tell you about. Listen to it very carefully. First, He speaks through dreams. Verse 15, in a dream, a vision of the night, when sound sleep falls on men, they slumber in their beds, He opens their ears, and the reason is, verse 17, so that He can keep man back from becoming proud. And that was the reason why God gave a dream to Nebuchadnezzar, and very often He gives dreams to others, to keep man away from becoming proud. Because when you become proud, God has to fight against you, according to His law, which says God resists the proud. To keep us back from pride, He gives us dreams. To keep us from going into hell, verse 18. And the second way God speaks is, verse 19, through chastening, sickness, illness. Man is chastened with pain on his bed, so that his life loathes food, and his soul favorite food, his flesh wastes away from his sight. And then, if there is only someone who can explain the meaning of this to him, in verse 23 it says, an interpreter who can explain the meaning of this. This is why God is allowing this. And so we see there are two ways which God speaks. And we read in Daniel chapter 2 that God spoke to Nebuchadnezzar through dreams. He did not listen. And then you come later on in chapter 4 that God spoke to Nebuchadnezzar through chastening. He made him mad, actually mad. He was insane. He lost his senses. He began to behave like an animal for about 7 years. He first spoke through dreams, then he spoke through chastening. God speaks through His Word, and when we don't listen, He speaks through chastening. So we see here God spoke through dreams to Nebuchadnezzar, verse 2 of Daniel 2. Then the king gave orders, and he called all the conjurers and sorcerers and Chaldeans to explain the meaning of his dreams. The king said, I had a dream. My spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans said, tell us the dream, and we'll declare the interpretation. And the king said to the Chaldeans, verse 5, the command from me is firm. The word has gone from me clearly. If you don't make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you'll be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and say, tell us the dream. We'll declare the interpretation. But the king was a smart person. He knew that if I give a dream, these fellows can give any interpretation to that and say that that is the meaning. But let me find out if these fellows are really got something supernatural in them. If they have got really something supernatural in them, they'll be able to tell me the dream itself. Then I'll know that the interpretation is also correct. You see, that was the reason why he didn't tell them the dream. Now in the King James Version it says, verse 5, the thing has gone from me. It wasn't the dream that had gone from him. It was the command, the word that was firm, which said, if you don't make known to me the dream and the interpretation. He wanted to test them. He said, I'll find out whether you fellas are genuine or not. Tell me the dream as well. And that they couldn't do. These were these people who had no touch with God. There's just human cleverness trying to explain various things. We find them in the Bible schools today. Human cleverness explaining a lot of things. Nothing supernatural. No Holy Spirit revelation. The king said no. He says, I know for certain you're just bargaining for time. And if, verse 9, if you don't make the dream known to me, there's only one decree for you. You're all going to be slain. Then the king Chaldean said, there's not a man on earth who can do such a thing. No great king has ever asked any such thing. That's because no king was as clever as Nebuchadnezzar to expose all these humbugs. And then verse 11, he says, the thing which the king commands is difficult. It's rare. There's no one else who can declare it except the gods. And if they were honest, they'd say, well, we're not in touch with him. And the gods don't dwell with mortal flesh. No. They're far away. And the king was very angry. You see, that was the difference between all these humbugs and Daniel. Daniel was in touch with the living God. Now I want to tell you this, brothers and sisters. In the last days in which we live, it's not enough to say, we claim to be in touch with God. We can explain the Bible. The thing is it human cleverness or is it supernatural revelation? Are we just like the magicians of Babylon, saying, yeah, give me the word, I'll explain it? Or is there something supernatural in our lives? So many believers, there's nothing supernatural in their lives. It's just human cleverness. They're just like the magicians of Babylon. It's human cleverness that they are coming forth with from the Bible. No. They take up the Bible and say some very clever thought. The magicians of Babylon, multitudes of them. But to find a Daniel who can have revelation of the Spirit on that same word, and I tell you, there's a world of difference between one who ministers with revelation and one who ministers just a lot of clever thoughts from the Bible. World of difference. And we need to distinguish in these days, when a preacher gets up into the pulpit, whether he's a Babylonian magician or a Daniel, a prophet of God. Very important. It's very easy to get deceived here. The magicians of Babylon have got nothing supernatural in them, just human cleverness. You can meditate on that and get profit from it, I believe. And so the king was very angry and he was going to kill all the wise men, and they looked for Daniel. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment. I think the reason why Daniel was not called initially was he was a junior fellow. They called all the senior men first. And they kept the junior man outside there. But it's the junior man who had the answer. It was Abel who was accepted, not Cain. Yeah. It's the youngest boy David who is the king, not the elder 7 sons. It's that young brother who's got revelation, not this old white-haired man who thinks that because of his white hair he's got wisdom. No. It's that young junior brother whom you despise over there who's got the revelation of the Spirit because he's wholehearted. That's the thing. Finally they had to go to Daniel. And then they came to kill him. But Daniel said, hey, wait a minute. Why the urgency? Why is the king so urgent? Verse 15. Now I want you to see here in the Living Bible, there's a beautiful paraphrase of his, that Daniel handled the situation with great wisdom. Wonderful translation. He handled the situation with great wisdom. And these fellows came and said, well, Daniel, come forth, we're going to chop off your head. He didn't get all panicky. He handled the situation with great wisdom. And he said, what's the matter? He was calm. He had faith in God. He was calm. He said, why is it so urgent? And when he knew about the matter, listen to this. Daniel went in and requested the king, verse 16. And he said, just give me time, and I'll give you the interpretation. Look at his confidence. The same confidence that we find in chapter 1. You test us and see after 10 days if we are not better looking than these other fellows. The same thing here. Just give me a little time, king. I'll give you the answer. His absolute confidence in a God who could supernaturally reveal a dream that somebody else had. Brothers and sisters, it is such people God is looking for in these days. People who have faith that a God will supernaturally intervene in their lives to deliver them from a delicate situation. Are you finding yourself in a tough situation? Are you sitting there in panic, unrest? Are you going to be like the compromising Jews in Babylon? Or are you going to be like Daniel and say, well, I have faith that there's an almighty God up there, sovereign, who's going to intervene supernaturally and deliver me from this situation in which I find myself. That's the mark of the overcomers of the last days. They have faith, and they confess their faith. They're not ashamed. Their faith is not hidden away in a corner. It's not hidden in their hearts. They stand up and boldly confess it. God's going to help me. Just give me a little time, I'll give you the answer. That thing which all the magicians of Babylon said, nobody can ever do this. Only someone who's in touch with God. There was a young man who was in touch with God. Just 20 years old. Some 20-year-olds sitting here today. I hope this will be a challenge to you. And a challenge to us who are so much older. 20 years old. What a confidence in God. And we read, Daniel went, and he said, I'll declare this thing. There's a contrast here between Daniel and these magicians of Babylon. It reminds me of Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings chapter 18. They thought they could bring fire down from heaven. Nothing happened. But there was one man, Elijah, who had absolute confidence in a supernatural God who would come down and bring down fire and vindicate his servant. Brothers and sisters, that's the need of the last days. Men like Elijah, men like Daniel, who have faith that God will intervene supernaturally if necessary to fulfill His purpose through us.